Video game controversies. And I really thank you for coming out here very early on a Sunday, Easter Sunday morning, where I'm sure you're all tired and feel like you've been dead for 3 days or just come. So, we got the Cadbury eggs. Originally I had 16, but it was a long plane flight from Texas. Now I have 14. So who wants one? Hands up. Hey. I'm just going to throw them in.
Just chuck the eggs. Happy Bigotry and International Video Game Controversies. Thank you again for coming out this morning to talk about some probably very uncomfortable issues. You want war crimes? We got your war crimes. We have racism. And of course, we have narcotics, homicides. So we're just going to go ahead and get started. I am Robert Rath. I'm a freelancer. And I got into this topic because in my other life as a paralegal, I work at the International Tax and Estate Planning Law Firm. I sort of ended up getting into advising clients on security because we have a lot of cross-border clients that would do business in Mexico. I thought this was very interesting. I sort of dug more into it. I became slightly obsessed with the Mexican cartel world. I ended up coming across a controversy that really no one had covered very much, which was the banning of Ghost Recon events, Warfighter 2 in the city, or the Mexican state of Chihuahua, which contains the city of Juarez. This is because it took place in Juarez, and it sort of mirrored what was going on with the ongoing cartel war, which had not quite reached the city yet, but it was on its way in. I wrote an article about that for The Escapist, and then right as I filed my article, I found out that Call of Juarez, the cartel, was coming out. And I cornered James at a South by Southwest and essentially hounded him that he must absolutely do an episode on Call of Juarez, the cartel, and how terrible this was. So after a bit of badgering, James very nicely did so. I sent him, he said, would you send me some research? I sent him 400 pages worth of documents, and he didn't kill me, which is very nice of him as well. So you all saw that episode, and now we got together to talk about some of these issues that, unfortunately, when a lot of these things come out, a lot of people get very defensive, like our shields just go up, and we don't want to hear them, right? Because if some other country has a problem, it's their problem. We want to play our games. And this shouldn't concern us. I feel very differently, and I feel that when we do that, we miss having a conversation that's very constructive, both about the medium and about how the world is changing and we're being connected. So, our next panelist.
I'm Steve Watts. I'm here because I wrote one specific article about war crimes and international human rights violations. You might recall last year there was sort of a buzz around the blogosphere of this, like the Red Cross talking about it. And I sort of wrote a response article to that, and don't pretend to be an expert on all things international human rights, but I dived into one topic, and I'm asking you to talk about
I'm Elisa Melendez. I'm a third-year PhD student of sociology at Florida International University in Miami, Florida. Thank you. I'm also a fragile cadet for Ubisoft, catching an Assassin's Creed booth today. And I'm here to sort of, well, one, because James asked me to be here, so I'm here. And also because I want to sort of abstract from these sort of real-life examples, kind of abstract to a more kind of sociological race background to sort of explain, why this matters in a social context and why perhaps these images kind of keep reoccurring in our video games. So I hope I can do that on very little sleep.
Hi everybody, I'm James Portnow. I'm here because I didn't realize it happened at 10 a.m. But no, seriously, Rob sort of dragged me into this at first because like, there's something you have to see, and pointed me towards Juarez. And for the longest time, I was like, oh, I'll get to it in a few, just pile of stuff. And then I started playing this game, and my jaw just dropped. For a long time, I thought they were joking, right? I thought that they had to be having some weird, very, very dry and Polish humor. Because otherwise, how do you name a level gangbang, have every model and every African American have the only level in which you get an award for the number of people you kill? This game really deeply disturbed me because as a designer, my principal job is at running a design consulting firm, running video games. And as a designer, we can do so much more with our games, and we lose a great deal if we cannot talk about real-world topics. And that's where we'll be at if we keep having this kind of sloppy design. And so, I would love to get a hand together for Rob, who's really been front and center in making sure that this sort of thing is addressed appropriately. So before we begin, thank you, Rob. Thank you for your presentation.
So there's the event itself. I would like to point out that Call of Juarez is not the first Ubisoft title to have gotten banned in the state of Chihuahua. In 2007, Ghost Recon Advanced Warfighter 2 had a very similar experience because it abstractly seemed like a cartel war. Had a lot of things going on with it, like, for example, journalists getting kidnapped by rogue elements of the Mexican military, which is something that's actually going on. Both the journalists being kidnapped and elements of the Mexican military going rogue and becoming enforcement arms for some of the cartels. The government obviously didn't like that for reasons that are completely understandable, and it was literally pulled from the shelves. Of course, with the market in counterfeit games in Mexico, you could get it. Also in 2006, Ubisoft titled Rainbow Six Vegas and started with a cross-border raid on a Mexican border town with the objective of destroying the human smuggling ring. So this is something we actually see coming up over and over for Ubisoft games. I also want to mention that Ghost Recon Advanced Warfighter and Rainbow Six Vegas are two of my favorite games of all time. So if I say anything bad about them, it's because I love them so much. And I think that they can do better than that.
Call of Juarez, on the other hand, it's a favorite game of all time.
You can do worse than Call of Juarez. It's, so my first question to all my panelists is, why do we want to care about international video game controversies?
Yes, I sort of touched on it to begin with, but for me as a designer, as we're expanding this medium, as we're reaching past just this totally abstracted idea of games are children's pastime, this has got to be things that we can talk about, right? A lot of you guys heard me write a little bit about 6 Days of Illusion. This idea of the documentary and the game that comments on things that are happening today. We are mass media. More people play games than read books, go to movies. They spend more time than they do watching TV, playing games. This is a place where people do get informed. good lord, people spend a lot more time playing games than they do watching the news. So in some ways, we don't have to be the news, but this is an angle we have to be able to take.
As a cultural product, I think that if we want to be taken as seriously as film, as art, we are art, as music, we have to step up to the plate and be responsible cultural and social productions as well. We can't sort of have our cake and eat it too. You know, we can't cry out, hey, you know, take us seriously. You know, we're not just for 13-year-old boys. We're art. We're art. We're art. You know, when it's sort of convenient for our purposes. You know, we also have to take responsibility for the social products that we create, because these things are not created in a vacuum. No social product is created in a vacuum. It's created by humans, for humans, that come with their own sort of social messages and internal socialization, their own definitions of what these sort of social facts are, and that matters. Games matter, to borrow from extra credits.
And I would just add that I think that our community is really passionate, and when we get conscientious and passionate about something, we can influence a lot of change. These are issues that are larger than the video game sphere. These are issues that manifest themselves across all media. And we're sort of on the same curve as a lot of media, but our community, I sort of pride the geek nerd community on being conscientious, and we can be ahead of there. We can do that, but we aren't doing that sometimes.
All right, so my next question, what are the dangers of representing foreign conflicts in games? Because overwhelmingly, what becomes controversial is a military product or something that involves violence. What are the things that we need to keep in mind? What can go so very, very wrong? I would like to point out on the slide that I've contrasted the numbers of U.S. casualties in Vietnam at the height of the war to the number of casualties in the Mexican Cartel War. And I would like to point out this number, the 12,903, that's because that was only until September. The actual number is, for 2011, is 16,466. So we're now almost matching 1968, which was the Tet Offensive. Thoughts?
I mean, the importance of what's happening just south of the United States can't be understated for us, right? This is something that shockingly has not gotten the news time that it deserves, and so it's even more important when our media touches it that we address it in some way that at least semi-accurately represents the actual conflict, allows people jumping off it to get involved and start learning about what's actually going on.
There's definitely sort of also consequences for those at home that might be sort of represented or even look like or even slightly resemble those that might find themselves in these kind of international conflicts. The games can provide a source of education, they do, and because of that, you know, if you're sort of giving people sort of a wrong and inaccurate picture of what's happening over there, then it gives people sort of the wrong opinion of what's happening over there that has consequences for the real lives that it touches here at home.
And besides giving people here the wrong idea of what's happening over there, it gives people there the wrong idea of how we look at what's happening over there.
I would actually like to point out that we're ragging on Call of Wars a lot, but this isn't the only game that represents foreign conflicts. This can also be seen as a way of looking at the U.S. from the outside, because I'm not sure this is clear, but Call of Wars was not made by a U.S. company. It was actually made by a company in Poland, which explains some of the stereotypes you find in it. Because if you look at the demographics of Poland, it's about 97% white. So where do they get the ideas that they end up putting up on the screen? In general, it's from movies. And not necessarily even modern movies. It might be exploitation films from the 70s, which can be very popular in Europe. Which Eddie Guerra, one of the protagonists, and this guy in the center, I remember as I played the game, I thought, this guy is a total stereotype from 1970s
film like something you'd see, in a Robert Rodriguez film, getting riffed on. I have a gambling problem and I wear all this jewelry, and, these giant sunglasses. And I finally occurred to me, just like, this is possibly what people in Poland have been given in our ongoing cultural exchange, as this is a representation of what a Hispanic person is like. So where do we draw the line between a representation and an exploitation?
I mean, to me, what surprised me about Call of Juarez was the moment that I really decided this had gone far too far was the moment that I went into outright lies, right? I speak at a lot of universities, and I was at a university about 4 weeks back. I was talking, and I ran into a kid there and came up to me and said, "Oh, I was having a conversation with somebody at school, and we were talking actually about the drug war, and they said to me how horrible it was and how bad it was for America because these guys were coming up and kidnapping American women." And he said, "Oh," and at that moment, the light bulb went on, and I was like, "Wait, where did you hear that?" And he said to me, "Call of Juarez," right? So we do actually inform, but I mean, that's just plain false, right? Like, it doesn't even make sense. Do you know, unfortunately, the tragic truth is, do you know how much more dangerous and less lucrative it is to kidnap women in the U.S. and bring them to Mexico than kidnap Mexican women and bring them to the U.S.? But the hard truth is, for us as Americans, we have to acknowledge the fact that's what's actually happening. We're paying for these women to be enslaved. And so, at the moment when we break from all reality into not fiction, but straight up lies, that to me is the moment we've gone too far.
For me, it's a distance problem. Always, like, for example, we have the first-person shooter industry was based in World War II. For Americans, that's a conflict that feels very distant. It was not on our shores. Generally, though we're related to people as gamers that were in the conflict, we didn't have a direct experience of it ourselves. I grew up in Hawaii next to the first air base bomb during the Pearl Harbor attack, so I feel a little closer to it, and I've walked a lot of World War II battlefields, and I've noticed that I actually have a different feeling when I play World War II games than my friends that did not have that background. Because to me, it's something very real. I also did world history with American and Japanese World War II veterans in the Pacific. So I think distance can be a real problem too, which I think we'll probably come back to. And this is another example. This didn't really get a lot of play, but the final mission of Modern Warfare 3, Ashes to Ashes, is in the Arabian Peninsula, not Dubai, which is where it's actually set. And the hotel that you raid is based off an actual hotel, the world's only 6-star hotel, the Burj Al Arab, literally means the Tower of the Arabs in Dubai. If you will see above, this is the actual, or excuse me, above is the Modern Warfare depiction of the entranceway. Below is the actual entranceway. This isn't the only similarity. You can actually find YouTube videos online walking through both. There's a very active gaming community in the United Arab Emirates. There was never really any pushback from this, which I found very interesting. Even the hotel didn't say anything, but as we increasingly use real locations, real conflicts as inspiration, we're going to constantly butt up against examples like this. And it is a little bit iffy because, they're picking a terrorist Makarov who owns part of this hotel. And the Burj Al Arab in the region is a very big point of pride because it's a really good way to say, look, we can build these great buildings too. We can have 5-star hotels. Another example of the Burj Al Arab, which is the tallest building in the world, which we'll get back to. So, war crimes.
It's a cheery topic.
It's a cheery topic. Steve.
Yes.
Report by the International Committee of the Red Cross and Red Crescent.
Yes. Well, to a little background. This flared up last year because the International Red Cross brought up at a conference. It actually goes back to a 2009 study by 2 Swiss humanitarian groups who basically pointed out, hey, there are a lot of war crimes in games. A lot of times your character or characters around you are committing war crimes. They weren't saying, you know, restrict them, ban them, anything like that. They were just saying, be mindful of this, maybe developers should do that. It came back around in 2011 when Red Cross and Red Crescent brought it up. And a lot of blogs, you saw people reacting in kind of defensive ways, like Rob referenced earlier. You know, are gamers going to be trying to hate? You know, of course they are. But the question that I found more interesting was, well, wait a minute, are they right? So that's sort of what I poured the research into, and they were absolutely right. There are a lot of the Geneva Conventions and the Hague Conventions that we violate in games all the time. So, as an example, quick show of hands. When you've been playing a first-person shooter, how many times have you had someone crawling away bloody and you have to finish them off, shoot them? That's a war crime. It happens all the time. It happens all the time because in games there are 2 states for an enemy. There is dead and there is threat. There's almost never surrendering. And that's something that's a reality in war and a reality in war crime laws. So surrendering, you don't shoot them, or if they're injured, you get medical attention. So little examples like that are just small ways we can make games more realistic by having more states of enemy interaction. So that's one easy example, and it happens all the time. And so I think in relation to our panel here today, that goes to the question of when we put these things in games, we're sending the impression that we don't care, that the content creators here are flippant about what war crimes are and what constitutes them, and that we don't care. And that sends a bad message about our culture, and it's part of an endemic problem of media at large, because you see it in TV and movies as well.
A little bit about this slide. This is a part of the Resistance Fall event. It's in Manchester Cathedral. Is this a war crime?
Yes. This was something that it sort of raised controversy, if I recall, because the church raised issue with it, not so much Swiss humanitarian groups in that case. But it is a war crime to fight within a church, near natural church buildings damaged. National monuments and points of pride and artistic works and things like that are protected. You're not supposed to fight anywhere near them. So yeah, Manchester Cathedral, totally not supposed to be fighting in there, but you do. The thing is, with these monuments and famous buildings and things like that, they set them in there because they're iconic. It's an understandable desire for game developers. It's like, oh, this is a very cool, iconic location. Let's set a level here. But it is almost always some sort of war crime or horrible insult to the culture of the hotel, because you're having people dying in something that they actually pride themselves in.
Well, and part of the problem is also you never even get the one line, you never get the voice tab, which calls out this fact, right? The fact that it's a shame that we're fighting in this place, right? You don't even acknowledge that within the game.
Interestingly, Ghost Recon 2, or Ghost Recon That's What 2, actually said that one of the ghosts is a Hispanic character, and he says this is a beautiful country, and I hate seeing it like it is right now. Which was, to me, was a very interesting thing to put in there. A little bit about Manchester Cathedral. The reason that the Church of England got so upset about this is Manchester has a big gun problem, and they do anti-gun violence programs through the cathedral itself. Yeah. Now there's this next one. I think it will surprise you.
This is kind of funny. The gun mode mission in Modern Warfare, it's very famous. It got a lot of attention from our sphere of being like, oh, this is kind of interesting that it's depersonalizing war and it's showing how robotic and game-like it is. And I think that's an interesting discussion to have. The Red Cross's take on it was like, no, that's pretty right. Because if you gun down civilians or if you hit a church, mission over, you fail. So you have to be very careful who you targeted and where you targeted. And they actually, they were okay with it.
So can I actually throw in, because we Call of Duty series is something that I've worked on up through the the first Modern Warfare, and specifically that scene, we were actually trying to sort of establish the remote horror of modern war and really raise some more about kind of the voice chatter that you get from the pilot is actually meant to cue in the player, because what the pilot says in some ways is kind of a red kind of heroes.
Yeah, it's character.
Right, and that's what's actually signaling the player that, wait a minute, that guy's a jerk, I don't want to be like that guy, right? So there was a lot actually going on, a lot of thought went behind AC-130, which is, I think, all we're missing from all these other moments, right? Like, I hate to bash Modern Warfare 2, right? But Modern Warfare 2, when I saw Karachi, I was shocked because probably a lot of you guys know this, right? But they speak Urdu, they don't speak Arabic. All the signs in Karachi in the map are in Arabic. And I was like, really? You didn't bother to figure out what language they speak in Pakistan? And so, to me, it's unsurprising that that would be a level that the Red Cross would be more all right with than a lot of the running and gunning.
Yeah, it's a lot about contextualizing the violence. It's not so much about removing it. It's putting it in the proper context.
Well, while we're on Modern Warfare 2, I want to add that the No Russian mission had a very interesting response, which was everyone in the media, the games media, and the media at large kept saying, oh God, this is just like Columbine, 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 Columbine. 1 year before the game came out, there was something that you might remember called the 2008 Mumbai terror attacks. It was pretty much exactly what happened in No Russian, except it was in hotels and restaurants instead. It was a militant group called Bigotry. So that was totally lost on everyone, because for some reason, whenever there's a game controversy, we immediately pull it as close to home as possible. We don't think about how this might be seen in other cultures, or even how this might have been thought up. Because for years, intelligence reports have been saying that terrorists are not going to be hitting airplanes, they're not going to be doing bombs, they're going to be trying to acquire guns and just kill as many people as possible because it's easier to do, and you won't get caught as easily. So I found that very interesting.
No Russian is a really interesting example to me because, again, here's a place where we missed the opportunity to sort of clue in the player that there's more to think about here. What surprised me about No Russian is, most of you guys have played Modern Warfare 2 through the No Russian scene. I'm going to spoil some stuff if you haven't, but at the end of that scene, you die anyway. So I tried to play through that scene, essentially, as you're supposed to be an American agent, essentially refusing to do this, right? And they could have killed me anytime across it. You can't actually get through the level. You can't as a player. The power of medium is interactivity, is the ability to make choices. And here, they didn't allow me to make choices. I had to go and kill Russian civilians as a Russian police officers, as an American agent. That, in a way that didn't even affect the storyline, right? It didn't change the narrative at all. If I just hadn't shot at him for 45 seconds, and they had cut to Makarov shooting you in the head and saying the ending line that he says anyway, done. But then I made a real choice, right? And at that moment, you really clue people into, no, you should be thinking more about this, right? You shouldn't be just mindlessly killing all these civilians because it's part of the level of the game, right? This has meaning. And so to me, again, it's a moment where we can bother to think through how we can contextualize this for the player in order to give them an avenue to think back more.
Okay, we have to move right along. This is something, a photo I took yesterday from the booth at Spec Ops The Line. This was banned in the UAE almost immediately upon announcement in 2009 because it takes place in Dubai. And Dubai is in a state of decline. The UAE tends to ban games that portray negatively or films. For example, they were really cool with the latest Mission Impossible, which is the version, which is this tall spire building on a shoulder. It's the tallest building in the world. We're going to just burn past that. We can ask more, but you can see, even though they really did go out of their way to try and not make this offensive. But you can see by the poster how you would see that being from Dubai, especially if you're not a gamer, and completely not get all the concessions they made, right?
All right, so representation of foreign people in games.
Yay!
This is it.
That's, I guess it's my turn. Well, I guess what I would sort of like to address maybe is sort of in a wider context, not just for games, but in other aspects of media, because I mean we're on our way to being taken just as seriously as them, so that's taking the task, right? But I sort of like to think about so in that last sort of picture of Spec Ops, the idea is that the enemy is actually rogue American soldiers, right? However, looking from that picture, you probably wouldn't know that necessarily, and internal biases would sort of take over and say, okay, well, this is another one where you're shooting the quote-unquote Arab terrorist. Link those two things together as we often tend to do. And this isn't necessarily, a modern experience. We've been sort of ranking people since the dawn of times, and since we've learned socially how to rank people and differentiate ourselves from the person in front of us. We tend to associate ourselves and another person in terms of, okay, I am this, they are not that, this person is not this, they don't look like me, they don't act like me, whatever. That's kind of an internal thing that we do just in order to sort of get along and identify people in the world. Unfortunately, what ends up happening is that sort of is used to then rank people, and back in the day, in the times of Plato and Aristotle and all those old folks, it's called the great chain of being, where you had angels and seraphim up at the top, animals at the bottom, humans were somewhere in the middle, and then you just kind of rank those in terms of skin tone. And the darker you were, the closer you tended to be to the animal kingdom. It's been happening since the days of Plato and Aristotle, and unfortunately, this sort of idea of the foreign, the other, as being inferior, carries over into today. But what tends to happen is that, this distance that we've been talking about, when it comes to things like, World War II, when it comes to things like even, earlier periods, like an Assassin's Creed, or, other games in sort of more historical time periods, there tends to be, I guess, a more, favorable view, but I think distance definitely helps, because as we've probably heard, history is written by the victors, and when you have that sort of distance and you have that privilege of being able to construct your own history, keeping in mind, the demographics of some of the people that are actually creating these works of cultural production, you tend to have a sort of privilege that says, this idea, this great chain of being, doesn't affect me, because I'm kind of high up on the chain anyway. I don't get to feel the ramifications of what I do, therefore, there is a distance not just of history, but in sort of, your modern relationship to the effects of the thing that you're about to create, which is why, it's very, very convenient in modern times to have a very convenient other as the enemy. It paints a very, very sort of concrete picture.
It's weird to say history is written by the winners in this context, because Europeans lost the Crusades, and these are both Crusade era figures. So I think I don't know, there's something weird about the Crusades where we just as if we see it like Western culture run amok, and we kind of understand that we were the bad guys there. What? Huh? Though interestingly, there were a lot of Crusader cities, because they were there for over 100 years, and there were a lot of cities in the Middle East where Christians and Muslims lived together, and this wasn't a problem.
Huh? What?
There's a really great story. There's a really great story about a French knight who had recently come to the Holy Land, and he sees a Muslim man go down and start saying prayers, and he notices that he's not praying toward the Holy Sepulchre,
So he actually goes and picks the guy up who's still in a ball and turns him around and puts him down, pointing to throw the horse up at her. And then he walks off. And this guy, of course, is not going to do or say anything. He's not a noble. Scrambles around and goes back and he keeps turning him around over and over and over again. And this other Crusader knight who's born there just walks in and goes, "What the fuck are you doing, dude? He's praying toward Mecca. What's your problem? He's not a Christian. That's okay." So it's funny that we have thoughts about history that aren't necessarily.
Yeah, it's not only sort of like it's written by the victors, in terms of like not only the actual victors of conflict, but I mean the victors in terms of the privileged victors in sort of like the modern day era. It's like very, very convenient. Like, I didn't know that. Who knew that? Who knew that? I don't know that. You didn't tell me in school and didn't give all that stuff. It was all like, hey, white people are awesome. And that's great. It's like that's what I got.
To add to the distance thing, like you talked about how our first person shooter was set in World War II. It's like Nazis are monsters now. Like we don't really think of Nazis.
They're zombies.
Yeah, like they're one step above zombies, even if they're Nazi zombies. Like we don't think of them as men who are following orders, which most of them probably were. They're faceless, evil things. They're evil killers. And it's kind of scary now seeing this trend where like the Arab terrorist is becoming like the new Nazis, like the new faceless evil thing.
Well, and there's never a reason given in these World War II games why they're evil. How many here have played a World War II FPS? I love World War II FPSs. Who here has ever in one of those liberated concentration camp?
So you know what's really funny? The only game I've ever played where you liberated a concentration camp is Valkyria Chronicles.
Really?
Yeah, that's true.
Right.
I had no idea.
Yeah.
Right.
And Valkyria Chronicles, for anyone who doesn't know, it is a fantastic strategy RPG, but it has this weird faux World War II setting where the Darksons
Yeah.
are basically the Jewish people and they have dark hair, a lot of racist towards them. And the evil empires is wiping them out. It's a very bizarre Japanese fantasy take on World War II.
It's very anime World War II, and it's the most serious look at World War II that I've seen in a game.
Yeah, well, my favorite World War II game actually is Call of Duty World at War. And it's because, as I said, I interviewed Pacific War veterans, and a lot of it, there's some real problems with depictions of Japanese soldiers, I'm not going to lie. But a lot of the things that are in it, they do really well. That idea of a conflict that had really ugly hatred in it. In the Russian campaign, your Sergeant Reznov is constantly pushing you to commit war crimes. He's saying, kill these wounded Germans. It's like one of the first things he says to you. Then there's a bunch of guys that are fleeing without even guns in their hands toward the hills and just shoot them. At one point, you corner a bunch of Germans that have thrown down their weapons and are trying to surrender in a subway stairwell. And he's just like, throw a grenade down there, kill all those guys. And you can do either. You can not do it, or you can do it. If you don't, someone else does it. And to me, that was a really powerful message that this conflict is so out of control that your individual choice doesn't necessarily even influence the outcome. So I kind of saw that as like the polar opposite of the No Russian, because I felt like that did have a point. Now we're going to go into solutions. One of those solutions is if you want something done right, you have to do it yourself. Game development in the Arab world and South America. And James, you are the expert on this?
Well, at least in South America, I do a lot of work in Brazil. I'm starting to do some work in Argentina, and it's always interesting to me. I go down to Brazil, and okay, I'm going to go back to Modern Warfare. But Modern Warfare 3, you have a number of scenes in the favelas, and the guys in these favelas who are shooting at you are supposed to be the most hardcore of gangsters and drug runners, and they're there. And my Portuguese is actually terrible, so I didn't pick up on it. But when I went down there, I talked at universities for a lot too, and everybody came up to me after it was released and was like, "Did you check that out?" I was like, "Well, what was wrong with it?" And they're like, those guys are using 70s slang, so they'd be the modern equivalent of gangsters saying tubular and radical. Because they clearly just hired Hollywood voice actors who knew some Portuguese or could do the lines, but they didn't check with anybody about what actually would be spoken down there. This is the most ludicrous moment for them. But the thing that continuously asked is, there's 185 million of us. We are the games for Brazilians, right? And what they found is that, also because of the tax structure, but largely the rest of the world currently doesn't care. So they're going to have to start building them themselves. And it's going to start with smaller games. There's a lot of stuff that they're building around the Olympics, but there are a lot of games that they're building. One of the ones that just recently came out and actually got an international release was the game about capoeira.
I have Soul Heroes 2 up there.
Oh, okay, great. Capoeira Legends is another really good one, which is about the Brazilian martial art that actually grew up out of, it was a way for sort of slaves to train for slave rebellion. They had this dance which trained you essentially in the fundamentals of their form of martial art that became outlawed. Has a very rich cultural history down there, very interesting, great setting for a game. And they developed a game around it. So I mean, part of it is going to have to come from various cultures getting more involved in game development. Game development, with all the new distribution methods, is no longer exclusively an American, European, and Japanese thing.
And what can the industry start doing very, very, very quickly, so we can get to questions? In the United States, in Europe, in Japan, to help move things forward?
Well, so one of the things that we can do, at least in the Latin American market, is it's foolish that we don't publish Latin American games. So the U.S. isn't going to be the largest consumer in the world forever. Latin America is a huge market. Right now, there's nobody funding games in Latin America. The idea that we don't step in, I mean, it's horrible, but the idea that it's bad business that we don't step in and become the publishers for Latin America as well, right? Let them develop down there. And I mean, right now, especially because there's so many people so passionate about it, it's incredibly cheap to get really good games out of a lot of Latin American countries. So I think we're going to miss the boat. I think they're going to develop their own publishers and start another games industry in Latin America, like you've seen grow up in Korea and other places like that. But yeah, just getting some money into that ecosystem and starting to publish those games and helping get distribution for those games. Because a lot of those guys are, and it says willing to take terrible percentages just to get distribution here in the U.S. for games that would actually sell you.
And I mean, I guess as sort of proposed solution as a sociologist, this might sound incredibly self-serving, but I mean, it's kind of like one of my goals, like, eventually, once I do end up being a doctor, to hopefully be, one of the people that I would just be like, sometimes I wish that a developer would just ask somebody, like get the right dialogue in Portuguese, get a better sort of cultural understanding of historical periods. Like just do some more research. Ask a historian, ask a sociologist, ask people, and I think that it's, when you think about it and you dig deep enough, history, reality, quote unquote, if you dig, enough and actually care enough and realize that games matter this much, if you care enough, you realize that what we have already is rich enough, without having to make up some delirious, outright lies or be incredibly insensitive. I think a richer, basically paying attention to actual social context, actual, historical record, I think will, it's all there, and just ask somebody, and this extends to, development as well as marketing, promotions, which is, kind of like one of my big sort of beefs is on some of the marketing and promotion side of things. But it's like ask somebody, just take a little bit more time, care, realize that games matter, and act accordingly.
And I just want to give a quick shout out to Microsoft because they actually have someone Kate Edwards, who does this for them. Maybe it's because they're that big a company that they can do it, but they learned way back in the day. They released a version of Windows with the clock, and you know how it used to show you where the time zones were? Well, one of those, I think it was 95 or XP, they missed the 3 pixels that are Kashmir when you find the time zone for India. Any government wouldn't sell a single copy. Billions of dollars. And after they realized they could do that for everything, including games.
So that's a sore spot that it would be lumped with Pakistan instead of India.
Right. That is a really rough one.
So,
another sort of step the industry can take. I think the examples we've all been noting, the things that we've noticed either as good examples or bad examples. The difference between the good examples and the bad examples that I think we've all been citing is like 1 or 2 lines, like just something to contextualize it with. The difference between horribly insensitive and that's an interesting commentary on how we treat these foreign conflicts is like a line explaining, you know, that this is a bad thing that you're doing. You're participating in a bad thing. It's not that you can't interact and participate in that bad thing in a video game because it's an interactive medium and that's a really powerful teaching tool. But at the same time, just explaining why that's bad or that it is bad, having something to make you feel bad can be the difference between horrible and kind of incredibly artistic.
And I would like to point out, since I've really bashed a lot of Ubisoft products today, they really are my favorite game company. But Assassin's Creed 2 has a staff historian. And I'm very into that period. And they get stuff correct that's incredible. I mean, at the very beginning of the game, you know, you're in the bedroom with this woman, and I'm just like, seriously, her? Because she was an actual historical person. She was the model. She was the model of her about of Venus. She was the mother. But you know, when they're going into all the history of all these buildings and things like that, that's all real, and it's very well done. So that you know you can do it. It's possible. Also, before you go to questions, I'd like to say there's this weird feeling that we're like running out of wars. Like everything has to be modern because we're tapped out on conflicts. We have not run out of wars, okay? It's that we're doing the same thing over and over again in World War II. We've landed in Normandy like 6 times already. I think we can leave it. Stalingrad, like what, 3 or 4?
I'm waiting for a Crimean War where I can go land, sit there, camp outside, siege a place, and then die of disease.
There you go. I would love, for example, to play a game where I'm a Polish rebel in the ghetto uprisings. That's the kind of game I want to play. Or I'm a Filipino partisan fighting the Japanese. I think that would be a spectacular game. Or you know, actually have them go into the Sino-Japanese War. Never did
every game gotta have a hot level.
That's true. All right, so let's take questions real quick.
You want to queue up in the mic.
Oh, yeah.
Hi, my name's Aaron. I thought this was an excellent presentation. I just actually had a couple comments and I guess a question. In terms of the 2 slides you identified as war crimes, the individual in question was carrying a weapon and capable of pointing that weapon at other combatants. My name is Captain Aaron Creed, U.S. Army. Not the only name in that person is a legal combatant, and it is acceptable under Geneva Convention to fire and kill them. A different image, I understand exactly what you guys are talking about. I know in all those games there are people who will be crawling away. You do not shoot those people. And I think if you use a different image, you probably would have conveyed that better. Second comment was the church. I haven't played that particular game, but again, yes, those are protected sites. However, if those sites are occupied by an opposing force and they're using them as a military installation and firing on you, you can get clearance from your higher up. I think if games would do that and say, hey, you're taking fire from this mosque, you know, call up to higher, hey, we're doing this, blah, 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 can we now shoot them? Yes, okay, boom, put a tank around it. That's what generally happens.
Sorry, you are absolutely correct on both of those points. And
and I forgot to mention the gun, I couldn't find an image of someone without one. That's why that's
Well,
and I was doing this at like 2 in the morning last night, and I was just like, what?
Then they have to create a character model without a gun, that's going to take
Yeah,
forever.
exactly. You're absolutely right, I forgot to contextualize that, thank you.
Yeah, see, context.
On your second point, you were absolutely correct. In fact, for a long time, insurgents would actually specifically take positions inside or just sites
Yeah.
because they knew they were protected.
Yes. I just want to say again, thank you. This is actually a very great discussion. I appreciate you guys bringing this up. I don't remember what my question was.
Thank you. And thank you for listening.
Hi, thank you for putting on this panel. I'm really impressed with all the work that you guys are doing. My name is Tony Lopez, and I have a Hispanic background, and I'm dating a Kuwaiti woman. So you wouldn't believe the shocking amount of, just racism and stereotypes that we hear every day, and I'm more and more and more sensitive to it. Like when Ramadan comes around, like I observe Ramadan with her, not religiously, just to be supportive. And why are you doing that? That's weird. That's unhealthy. I'm not even going to get into that, but we largely attribute it to ignorance. It's not people intentionally being malicious. It's just that they don't know. They don't even realize that what they're saying is offensive. And I hear Hispanic ones too. But my question is, what can gamers do to inform themselves of all of these cultural contexts? Because it seems a little overwhelming. The amount of, not everybody can read the 400 pages of research, right? So what are some simple things that people can do to stay informed? And the second part of that is, what responsibility, if any, do game developers have to keep people informed and to have factual accuracy in their games?
So, to me, I think as game developers, we do have responsibility. There's no way to deny it. That one is simple. As far as gamers, engage in dialogue and be open to dialogue. That's all I can say. Because really, that's where the root understanding comes from, in my opinion.
Yeah, there's no such thing as just a game. And as long as you sort of enter your game space in that context, especially if you're playing something that's supposed to represent something from some sort of historical background or modern conflict or something, if there's something that piques your interest, don't just set it aside because it's just a game. There's no such thing. Like, actually take the next step and check it out, and if anybody else is interested, let them know what's up, and word of mouth helps.
And context not only extends to, contextualizing action so you know whether or not they're good or bad, but context extends to the tone of the game, because not all games have to be the ultra-serious examination of war, and, it'd be great if we had more of that, and I think all of us are sort of advocating that we want more of that, but like in any media, there's room for the big budget, Michael Bay, action, dumb spectacle, if that's how it's presenting itself, then that's fine. But a lot of games are presenting themselves as more serious and not following through with the right level of research.
And I think that's a really important point. None of us today comment on 50 Cent Blood in the Sand, right?
You mean that didn't happen?
He goes on stage with a bandolier grenades all the time, right?
9 times.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for mentioning 50 Cent Blood in the Sand. I was going to ask about it. Quick anecdote. One of my friends got a trivia question at a bar right because he played Assassin's Creed 2.
Nice.
My question is, you talked about if you want something done right, do it yourself. I was talking with Matt Weiss from MIT Game Lab last night, and he posited a theory that, in fact, we are not making games wrong, we are wrong. It is an issue with society and these sort of like subconscious inconsistencies and slight misunderstandings that we have that then trickle into our game, and it's not because we're necessarily going about the game-making process. It is in any medium and any conversation we have.
So can I know I've talked way too much, but this argument actually upsets me because I've heard it from other game developers And the truth is, it's a cyclical thing, right? Media creates culture, culture creates media. And so we have to start somewhere.
Yep.
And we are a media that influences that culture, that underlying undercurrent that leads us to that point.
Yeah, there's I was gonna say, there's a great article that I would encourage everybody to look up in order to sort of kind of start like the sort of process of kind of opening your mind to becoming better awesome people, awesome party people. It's called Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack. And the invisible knapsack, thank you, hey, applause, thank you, all right, work. And that is an article by, I believe it's Peggy McIntosh, look it up on your Googles. And it's basically, the invisible knapsack is sort of an invisible backpack that everybody wears that's full of all of these sort of invisible passports that you have that nobody else has. It's basically your privilege, right? And I think that if more people are able to sort of unpack their own invisible knapsack and realize the kind of privilege that they have, like the idea that I don't need to care about this stuff because it doesn't affect me, you know, like I can walk into some place, you know, I can observe my dominant religious beliefs without getting harassed because it's the dominant religious belief, for example, kind of thing. I don't have to worry about that sort of thing. If you kind of start unpacking your own personal privilege, and I think if more game developers did that, you know, like ignorance is no excuse. Like you need to be conscious of your privilege.
So the way to break the cycle is to just take the time to be deliberate in the choices we make as we're developing the game.
And speak up too. I mean, like when I mentioned earlier, like we can be ahead of the curve, we can be the conscientious crowd that our media is different, our media is smarter. Like when we complain not enough, we get stuff done. Iowa is changing the ending of Mass Effect because we complained a lot. So if we focus that energy towards, dare I say, more important things.
Arab youth used social media to bring down a dictator. We got DLC. I would also actually, I'm glad you asked that question. I'd like to point you to a novel called Throne of the Crescent Moon by a Lebanese-American writer named Salih Ahmed. It just came out. He was unhappy about the depiction of Arabic people in fantasy, so he decided to write his own novel. And it's based on the Arabian Nights. It's really good. Buy it.
Thank you.
Hi. So, sociology question, actually. How much of the fact that games are addressing this sort of thing do you think comes out of the same mechanism as like Grimm's fairy tales, the originals, not the watered down Disney? Is this the same? We're like trying to immunize ourselves against the terror around us by telling stories.
Interesting question. Gosh, that is way complicated for like 11 o'clock in the morning. I mean, I guess, you know, part of it is sort of the idea that, you know, as the sort of the technology keeps up and, you know, we want to be sort of immersive, you know, I think that, you know, the idea of, you know, wanting to be a part of the stuff that's going on, you know, in a sort of realistic, modern kind of fashion is kind of a way to sort of match that. I don't know, we speak to that a little bit as well. But you know, I think you know, yeah, it's a very, very sort of convenient way to say, you know, this is the kind of the reality of the situation that we're dealing with. You get to somehow, you know, kind of be a part of it or somehow like exact some sort of change or deal with it in some way through this like immersive technology. But at the same time, you know, like take care to do it correctly so that you're not sort of perpetuating this sort of cycle of kind of ignorance and desensitization and all that stuff.
And we're going to move on because we're really short on time.
Oh, okay. Wrap it around.
Okay, last question, and then we'll hang around. Or I will hang around, James Mann, later on.
I do have another panel almost immediately after this, but I think I'm confused.
I just have a point, actually. It's that theater companies for some 600-700 years have kept somebody on the employ called a dramaturge who actually studies the history of things. And this was to avoid libel laws historically, and we no longer sue people for these things, and that's why we, I think, in a large part, get away with a lot of the stuff that we do in these games. I also wanted to comment that when you have, you spoke of Brazilian games, so the capoeira or things like that. You need to be careful with that too, because we've talked a lot today about an Anglo-centric viewpoint and the damage that we're doing to the world. That's because we're the major player in this industry right now. But there are Libyan Facebook games where you defend, or I'm sorry, Italian Facebook games where you defend the shores of Italy against Libyans on rafts. Like, it's not an American problem. It's a worldwide problem of your own views being what you bring to the game.
And I was hoping to get to that because, I mean, it's true, right? China has an anti-Japan war online, right? Like, every culture is going to have these same issues, but since we are the dominant force, this is a good place to start, too. Right? We can lead the way in this.
I'll try to keep this quick. I'm Mexican American.
That we're out of time, unfortunately. But absolutely, ask your
Come on,
question.
ask.
Come on, ask your question.
Yeah, we're getting like the band.